Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 84 of the Dynasty Junkies podcast, a proud member of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network. I am your host, Rocky Petrella at Dynasty FF Addicts, along with my co-host this week, Andrew at Andrew Hall FF. And I feel like I can't start this pod, Andrew, without offering my condolences, since it's the first time we've gotten together in a little while. Uh, After that Bengals Super Bowl loss, great game. I thought they were going to pull it out at the end, but how you doing? You recovered yet?
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. I'm not gonna lie, but I'll be honest too. Like, it was one of those games that you watch as a fan of football, and just I enjoyed the game, and then as a fan of the Bengals, I enjoyed the game, and as a fan of fantasy, I enjoyed the game. Like, there was nothing about that game that felt bad, other than the outcome as a Bengals fan. But even then, there were some calls that went weird. Everybody was going to be, if the Bengals had come out victorious, nobody would have let us actually win that because of that missed call. So part of me is like, maybe this was the better outcome. It's not sour grapes, but it's been a weird week. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I know our guest tonight, I believe I heard him mention he was rooting for it. I don't think you're a Bengals fan, but I know you'd said on one of your pods that you were rooting for them to win. But we have an awesome guest here tonight. We have Ryan McDowell of DLF, among many other things that we'll let him plug at the end of the pod. But Ryan, how you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, guys. And yeah, I was certainly cheering for the Bengals. And I don't know, honestly, maybe it's just being in my region of the country where we're about an hour south of Cincinnati. It felt like everybody, unless you were a Rams fan, everybody was cheering for Cincinnati between the underdog story and of course just how much fun Burrow and Chase have been to watch this year. So I think there was disappointment all around. And Andrew, you're crazy. Come on, you're talking yourself into that.
Oh, sure, of course. This is the time of, the season is over. It's like, what a ride. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, like, what a ride. As a Bengals fan, you really don't ask for much more than get into the big dance. I mean, it's tough to get there. There's a lot of teams that deserved it. So again, I hate to say it again, but like, I was just happy to be there. Just happy to be watching my team in February. That's never happened before. So I was excited.
You'd like to think with a quarterback like Burrow that we could say, oh, they'll be back again, but he's got to go through Allen and Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert every year.
Yeah, it's murderer's row in the AFC. So yeah, it's going to be next year. I'm excited. Next year and the next year, like, it's going to build, I think, and that's where I hope it doesn't come to well, that was the one chance we had. I hope we don't look back on that. So yeah, I'm definitely, it hurts, but at the same time, I mean, honestly, like, Matt Stafford deserves a title, and Andrew Whitworth deserves a title, and Von Miller deserves a title, and it's hard to feel bad for that team. Cooper Kupp, my God, like that, what a play that guy had, like a couple different plays in the game. So again, it was a hell of a game. Nothing but love.
Yeah, I hear you. I know how heartbreaking it could be. My Eagles made it in 2004 for the first time in a long time. After multiple championship game losses, and it took us a while to make it back. Finally won first Super Bowl ever, back a few years ago with Nick Foles. Yep. So hopefully that happens for you quicker than 13 years from now. So, or 14, I think it was. But anyway, we're going to get right into it tonight because I believe we have a lot to cover on our topic for tonight. And with Ryan on, and just with the end of the season, we wanted to get into some team building strategies. The football season is over. Thought it was a great time to talk about it. Junkies like us are doing startups now. I'm actually in two as of right now, nice. That I'm probably going to bring up a little later. And I don't want to just talk about just from the startup perspective. I want to get into trading, rookie drafts, how we incorporate all of that. So I guess first I'll go. We have some listener questions too, and one of the topics I wanted to touch on with Ryan anyway was productive struggle, because that's always been associated with Ryan, and this is quote unquote a listener question from @Scott_Sidlow, our third co-host who's not on tonight. He kind of wanted to know, because I know he even mentioned this in our DM group. He wanted to ask, how exactly do you define productive struggle, Ryan?
Wow, it's been so long.
Well, has it changed? I feel like maybe it's changed. Maybe you've learned more and have like been able to refine it. Who knows? I mean, it's a pretty interesting topic.
Well, I mean, I think when it gets down to it, the idea really even behind the terminology is that you are accepting losses, accepting that struggle with a goal of hopefully multiple titles, multiple playoff runs, and a high level of success in building a dominant team. So the how you get there, that's probably changed. Sure, as the NFL has changed. I mean, I wrote that article originally in 2014. So yeah, certainly things have changed a lot since then. But yeah, I mean, in its simplest form, I would say that's kind of the definition of the strategy is, what we would have called tanking, and some people still do call tanking, but hopefully with more of an exact plan in place.
And I would imagine too, there's maybe like trading down in there. Do you try and pick up extra first and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, the original the original pieces of the strategy involved building around young players, building around and acquiring future draft picks, trading down in drafts. I mean, and all of those things have kind of become commonplace in dynasty startups. So in a lot of ways, productive struggle has become a lot more difficult to actually pull off successfully because not that everybody's trying it, not that everybody's trying to lose in year one or anything like that, but a lot of those pieces that made up the overall strategy have become the norm, right? I mean, almost everybody wants to move down. Everybody wants future first. Everybody wants those younger assets. I mean, we've seen the average age of the top 12 and top 24 in ADP drop almost every single year. Like that's becoming a common thing.
And well, two questions I wanted to ask you. Is it still something? I mean, I don't know how many startups you're doing, and this also goes into Scott's second question, which he says can it be implemented anytime or from startup or either. I mean, I guess if you're doing it after the startup, it's basically just what most of us would call rebuilding, isn't it? Pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I have certainly seen, I've seen some bad teams where the managers refer to those teams as productive struggle. But like, if you're not doing something, if you're not doing the productive part, you're going to keep the struggling. Right. So if you don't have a plan, right. If you're not making trades and working the waiver wire and really kind of have a 1 to 2 year plan in place, then you've just got a bad team on your hands. Right.
Right.
But yeah, I would say, I mean, when I wrote the article, the original strategy was referencing a startup, and that's kind of always what I've associated with the strategy, I guess. But sure, I mean, I would say it could be done at any time. I think the startup is the best time to do that because. I mean, we all know in a lot of cases that's the cheapest you have. That's the cheapest chance you have to acquire a lot of those players, especially
and the
rookies
picks sometimes too, like
right?
Future first,
yeah. So I think that's the best time to do it. But yeah, certainly tearing it down and building with some of those same ideas in mind of acquiring future picks and young players that you think will gain value, et cetera. Sure.
Well, so I mean, I actually wanted to jump in here for a second because I remember my first Dynasty League was in 2018. I started it with some home friends or whatever, we're just fantasy fans. And it was an auction, which I had never done, in Dynasty, which I'd never done. And I mucked it up like none other. I didn't know what I was doing. I was price enforcing when I shouldn't have been. And I got stuck with some bad players at wrong prices. So I was thrown into a productive struggle. Yeah. And I remember after going 0-3, I want to say, I started looking up like, all right, well, how do I turn this around? Like I've done a bad job right out of the gate, not intentionally, And I remember finding your article, and it was kind of like that. Oh, that's not a bad idea. Like, okay, so I can lose the battle and still win the war, right? Like I can take the hit and trade for all the injured players that nobody wanted at a discount. And I can trade for future first and trade away players that are scoring points because I don't care about points right now. Like it was a really eye-opening experience, and I was in it, so I got to do it. And when you do it, it's even more fun. And I went and won the league the next year, and everybody in the league saw that, and everybody was like, "Oh man, you really traded your butt out." And now this year there are 3 teams doing it. You know what I mean? So like what we were just saying, like now everybody saw it work, and they're like, "Okay, I get it." And I showed them the blueprint, right? Pun intended in a way, where it's like I taught them how to do this, and then they're getting to do it too. But that hits exactly what you said. Now it's harder because there's more competition for those picks, and there's more competition for those younger players.
And I was going to say, I think the best thing about doing it in the startup too is that's the point where everybody, I think at that point, most people think they're going to win.
Exactly.
It's like when you're a couple of years into a league, there's some teams that are already rebuilding and all that kind of stuff. When you start with 12 other managers, almost everyone, even if people want to trade down, they all still want to try and win that year one.
Most of the time,
do. Yeah. So that's another way that it helps. The other questions I was going to ask you was just, is that still your preferred method if you were doing a startup today? Is that probably how you would attack it or no?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I'm doing, kind of like Andrew was referencing there. I find myself doing more auctions when I'm doing new leagues than drafts. And you can definitely do productive struggle in an auction, targeting those types of players, etc. I think it's so much easier to build a win now team in an auction than it is in a draft. So in those startup auctions, I kind of find myself almost with a hybrid strategy. I still want those players that I think are going to be cornerstone pieces. I'm still trying to acquire future assets, but sometimes the veterans are just so cheap that you can't pass them up. So again, you're looking for players. Sometimes I throw out that generic term of young players, build around young players. And that really is a reference to players you think are going to gain value. And a lot of times that's young players, but drafting Gronk in the last round of a startup a couple of years ago would have been a productive struggle move. If you still believe drafting Andrew Luck in the last round of a startup right now, I'm kind of past that one, but hey,
I did do that in 2021. I don't think I'm going to do it this year.
Right. Same. Yeah. A couple of years ago, maybe, but Antonio Brown's another great example. We saw the value bottom out with him over the past few years, and taking a chance on those types of players. They're not young, but they certainly have a chance to gain a lot of value if the situation goes their way. So, and that's really the idea, is acquiring those players that you think can gain value. So in a startup auction, that's almost unlimited, because you're getting a Melvin Gordon for $2 in a startup auction. He's going to 10x that value, right? Yeah. He's a pretty good chance he's going to be a starting running back somewhere, and half the teams in your league are going to need a starting running back at some point.
But none of them want him at the draft. Exactly. Like nobody wants to pay for him. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So, it's definitely a different plan in in an auction, but still kind of the same idea behind it. As far as drafts, like I said, I don't do as many. I did an industry league a couple of years ago, startup, pretty bad team, did not make the playoffs. I wasn't last. Last is kind of the goal, first or last. I think I was 9th or 10th. Didn't sniff the playoffs at all, and won the league this year. So
there you go.
That's kind of the ideal scenario of how it would play out: last in year one and first in year two. And I've been able to do that a few times.
And I like taking the productive struggle approach with orphans, right? Like taking over an orphan and then just being like, all right, I'm just going to tank year one, right? Productive struggle. Let's trade away all the valuable assets for picks. And like, that to me is the most fun part of Dynasty is trading. I mean, you're talking to some junkies who are on the Dynasty Addicts Network with Trade Addicts as one of our sister pods, who you'll be on soon. And obviously, trading is one of the most fun things about this. So, like taking over an orphan. Wait, you mean I get to trade everyone away, and everybody wants me to trade with them? Heck yeah! Where do I sign up? Like, so yeah, that's an easy way for me too to be like, I get to productive struggle. No one's judging me. I didn't draft this team. You know, like I love that. So yeah, it's the same idea for me.
And one other thing I was curious about, Ryan, because part of the strategy is to, be as maybe not as well, kind of to be as bad as possible in year one and acquire those future picks. Does draft class influence your decision to use the strategy though? Like we've known, it seems like I thought this was the case because I got into Dynasty heavily in Dynasty Twitter and podcasts and things around 2018. And at that point, we were already talking about 2020. I heard people talking about 2020, and that did pretty much pan out. And now we've been hearing about 2023, I think, ever since 2020 ended, it feels like. So, I mean, those are specific draft classes where you'd want to do it. And we were hearing a lot, I think, last year that this year, 2022, wasn't going to be as good. And that narrative has kind of continued. So say if you were doing a startup in 2021, would you be less inclined to do it because if assuming you're aware that the 2022 draft doesn't look as enticing?
I don't think I would ever be swayed from trying the strategy by a draft class. I mean, first of all, a year out, a lot of times we just don't know. I mean, even looking at what looks like it might be the top 12 of this current class, probably 5 or 6 of those guys were, I wouldn't say off the radar by any means, but we didn't necessarily see them being potential first round rookie picks. So I do think the class is a little stronger than it was expected to be, especially at wide receiver. That's certainly the strength, but we've had a couple quarterbacks pop up that maybe we didn't see coming, a couple tight ends as well. So I think this class specifically is a little better than it's being given credit for. In general, I'm still doing the strategy. I'm still going with it because I know no matter what, really, and no matter how bad the class is, there's still going to be some rookie fever out there, right?
That's
so
true.
even if I want to pivot off those picks for future picks for players, there's going to be teams in my league that covet those picks.
Yeah, and it's like not just like it's about just the picks either. I mean, like you said, it's about getting those players that are going to gain value. So I mean, even if you're worried about the class, you can still, do that and hopefully those players do gain value and it still works out for you. And like you said, the picks are going to gain value anyway, almost no matter how bad the class is. So
and one of the big pieces of productive struggle and why you want to finish last is you want that 101. Because in a typical year, the 101 is going to be a top 24 asset immediately. I don't think it's going to play out that way right now. Maybe it eventually will if we get some, some hype on these guys or the landing spot is perfect for Hall or for Burks or someone like that, or one of the quarterbacks. But in a normal year, we're seeing the 101 as a second round startup pick, if not higher. So, take that team that you drafted that you like, even though they were, not necessarily productive in year one, and now add a top 20, top 25 player to that. And that's a huge edge you have on the league.
For sure.
Okay. And one thing I wanted to throw out to both you guys, and maybe I'll ask you this first, Andrew, and Ryan can chime in as well, but I mentioned those 2 startups earlier, and I want to touch on one of them now.
I was going to say I want to hear about these.
Yeah,
one of the reasons I wanted to do this topic for this episode too is I think Dynasty is sort of in this really weird place this year, where like there's a bunch of aging point producers that we all assume are going to lose value, but they can help you win, and there's not a ton of young guys that have both the value and you can trust for points. So I did sort of in one of them, which it's a 14-team super flex. I did I guess I could kind of call a hybrid win now productive struggle strategy. I traded down multiple times. I picked up, I really like the idea of doing this strategy this particular year because of those, you're going to get a lot of point values falling, but I traded down multiple times, pick swaps, picked up. I have 523 first right now. I did not make my first pick till the 406, but I'm also trying to win now. So what my start has been, and the one bad thing about this that a lot of people will not like is the quarterbacks you're going to end up with. But I'm totally fine with that. If you don't know, Ryan, I like to generally draft. I don't go for the elite guys usually. I tend to draft the ADP QB2s that I think can be QB1s, basically is what I go for. And right now, I did not make my first pick till 406. We're in the 5th round. I have Tua, Cousins, Barkley, Dobbins, and Diggs, and 523 first. And my thinking here is, first of all, I'm still not totally old, even with those picks. And I do think some of those players at least can accrue value. But even if it goes wrong, I have 523 first to fall back on. And if it goes right, I have 523 first to help me make my push. So what do you think of that one, Andrew? I definitely want to get Ryan's input as well.
Well, I'll start with this and say that the best thing, and Ryan can hit on this, the best thing about picks is that they don't lose value, right? So it's a way to insulate your team from any sort of damage. So it's kind of a way, if you're in a startup draft, if you're taking, like you were doing, like if you're taking these trade backs and taking on future picks, that doesn't mean that you have to take those picks, right? We talk about this all the time in Dynasty, right, where you've got 523 first. Those are like, cash bonds that you can trade for players as the season goes along. So I've actually talked to some other people about this, where I get DMs all the time. I'm sure we all do, where we try to help where we can. And one guy was like, well, I was thinking I was going to do terrible. I have 522 first, and I won the first 4 games of the season. Should I pivot to win now? And I was like, always. I mean, that should always be on your radar. You don't want to just say, well, darn it, I'm winning and I'm sticking to my plan. Like, no, be flexible, right? Like, be water, try to figure out the way to make this work. And so what he started doing, and this wasn't my fault or I didn't help for weeks. And he came back later and he said, I ended up trading 3 of those firsts away for players, and I forget who they were, but they were scoring points. And next time I talked to him, I think he was like 10-1 and heading into the playoffs as the number 1 seed. And I said that in my head, that's kind of what I'm thinking with your situation here, where it's like, you're not necessarily tanking per se. You're adding value in ways that are not scoring points, but it's February. Nobody's scoring points, right? So like, who cares? Take the best asset. I was just in that Trade Addicts dispersal, and there were, the first overall pick, I took the 102. I'm like, I don't think there's any better asset than the 102 right now, because I don't think I've got a chance to do much better than that, right? And then like, just the way I'm looking at this is, what's the most value on my team right now? Picks are a lot of value. So I love that idea. And I think too, if you start to see some players that you picked up, those QB2s, let's say Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't leave San Francisco, or Kirk Cousins gets a major weapon, or who knows? There's all these question marks. Baker, for some reason, let's say Devontae Adams goes to Cleveland. And I hope that doesn't happen as a Bengals fan, but like, we don't know what's going to happen in free agency and all this. We see it every year. Nobody saw Odell Beckham going to Cleveland, right? And so like, that same kind of thing could happen again. And in 6 months, your team could be entirely different than where it is now. And then in August, in 6 months, that's when you start looking at it like, maybe I trade these picks away and start getting some players, right? Everything could be different. So I love that idea.
Yeah, and like I said, it's not even necessarily like I am trying to pick. Actually, now that I'm picking, I have 7 picks in the 4th and 5th round, and we're into the 5th round now, and I think I have a couple 7s and a couple 8s coming up later too.
But there's a ton of value there. So
yeah, that's what I'm saying, and that's why I like it, especially in this particular year. I wanted to try it out because, like I said, and I expected it'd be more like I'd be having more guys like Diggs and Evans and then on my team, I even got a Dobbins in there, and who's not old, and a Tua who's a young quarterback that I still believe in. So Ryan, I just want to get your thoughts on it before we move on.
Yeah, I like the strategy a lot as well. I mean, you're giving yourself outs with the picks, first of all, like Andrew said. So that's an obvious positive on your side. But the other thing, looking at these picks you've made, I mean, Tua, Barkley, Dobbins, and Diggs, all of those guys a year ago were 2nd and 3rd round picks in this format, if not first rounders, in Barkley's case. So I think grabbing guys like that who have proven, not only proven production in Barkley's case and Diggs' case, but proven value, right? We know fantasy players, dynasty players like those guys. So if they all bounce back, and Dobbins' case obviously was injury related. Barkley's Barkley, man, that team. I think they're trending right though. Like I'm feeling good about these hires.
That was my thinking.
Worse.
I'm trusting in Dable, and another year removed from the ACL. I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
I mean, I love the hire for Barkley. I love the hire in Miami for Tua. So, I mean, can you look at this and tell yourself a story that Tua and Barkley are both second rounders again next year?
Yep.
Like, I think that's pretty realistic, honestly. So I love those specific picks you made. And yeah, you're in great shape. It reminds me of, and I don't know if I ever gave this strategy a name. If I did, I'm kind of forgetting it. But at one point, I noticed it was around the time when I wrote Productive Struggle. So it's been several years. But if anything, this is even more true now. I noticed that I would, in the earlier rounds, that's where I was taking my young prospect running back. And then later I could get Melvin Gordon or, I don't know why that's the name that's in my head tonight, but, almost an upside down type of drafting. Draft your depth, young upside first, and then those veterans, right? Draft Lance and Fields in the first or second or third round, and then Cousins and Tannehill and whoever later.
Carr, those guys.
Yeah, I mean, you're drafting your starters in rounds 7 through 15, and your cornerstones prior to that. So that's kind of what you've done here, but your cornerstones are just those 523 picks,
right.
523 first that we know are absolute gold.
Okay, I'm glad I have both of your seals of approval. Then
you're doing great, Rocky. Keep it up.
Okay, so something else I wanted to touch on was just kind of general team build preference. Like, I know we all want to get value and all that kind of stuff, but for each of us, that means different things. And I tend to end up building my teams if I'm not doing this experimental strategy like I did on this one. I tend to build my teams a certain way. I mentioned the quarterbacks. I tend to like to grab, value to me means grabbing an elite tight end, especially because most of my leagues are tight end premium. I like the advantage it gives you. And I tend to be, I'm more of a running back guy. I believe you're more of a receiver guy though, Ryan, is that correct? How do you tend to end up positionally? Just loading up on receivers and quarterbacks?
Yeah, it's really simple for me, honestly. If it's a one quarterback league, I'm loading up. And I mean, loading up on wide receivers. If it's super flex, I'm going quarterback early and often. If we're talking a super flex startup draft, probably 3 of my first 4 picks are quarterbacks. So pretty much opposite of you, Rocky.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's good for me or bad, but that's kind of the general plan.
And I kind of am moving a little bit more away from the running back thing. I think it's going to be a little overblown this year, though, so I'll probably end up drafting them anyway because I think everyone's going to be going away from running backs, and I won't be able to resist the value. Like I said, I did grab 2 already, and I only have 1 receiver in that startup. So, but Andrew, what about you? How do you end up, not strict? This has to be this, but how do you tend to end up with your teams looking?
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of depends. I always like to add context, right? Context is key. So I always say it depends on who you're playing with, really. If I'm playing with a bunch of people I'm familiar with and that I can kind of, at least somewhat bookmark what they like to do and I can kind of play the room, right? If I'm at a poker table where I know everybody else, it makes it a whole different game than if I'm just sitting down random, right? Same logic here. If I'm just randomly joining a team and you're asking me which do I like to do, not knowing anything else, I like kind of the hero running back, as they call it, I think now, where you get like that one running back that you kind of have as you're locked and loaded. I'm in a bunch of leagues. I joined a few leagues even this year, either through orphans or through startups that are the 1-1-1 and 5 flex kind of a thing. And so that's where I feel like that kind of fits perfectly to that strategy where you really only need the one running back and the rest can all be receivers. But I think if I kind of had to narrow it down, maybe the first 5 or 10 rounds, if it's a 1 QB league, I'm probably 2 running backs. I try to get 1 quarterback, but I definitely don't get the first few. And then the rest are probably receivers. And then I'm probably going for that second tier of tight ends, like in that Hawkinson fan, not Waller anymore, although he's probably dropped into that tier now, like somewhere in that range. I like that second tier where they still have some young upside to get up there, but I'm not usually going for the Kittles and the Andrews and the Kelseys. I'm not usually going for the Mahomes and the Allens. Like, I don't think I have a single team with Mahomes on it. It's just not how I build my teams. So I'm kind of like, I would almost say I'm a mix, but I'm probably more like Ryan, where I tend to build through the receiving core just because I feel like that's the lower risk position. It's not the least risk, and there's always risk. But for me, it just feels better having, 4 or 5 solid receivers that I know aren't going to really fluctuate too much, aside from Calvin Ridley or those, kind of random players here and there where you just can't see that coming anyway. But yeah, for the most part, I like having that one quarterback, even in Superflex, one quarterback I can lean on, one running back I can lean on, a tight end I don't mind starting, and then, eight receivers in the first 12 rounds and just kind of loading up. That's pretty much where I go.
I did not do it on the startup I mentioned, but this will probably shock you, Andrew, and some of our listeners. I'm actually starting to lean a little bit more towards I don't mind, again, especially this year, getting that one quarterback. I don't think I'd ever draft 2 quarterbacks early. It's just not in me. But I just because there's not that many guys that I'm dying to draft, or like in the past, it felt like there were way more guys that I love to grab in like the second round, and I'd trade back from my first and draft a bunch of running backs or wide receivers, whoever, in the second and third, and maybe I'd trade up into the third, and you could. I just don't feel as good about, like, even like Devontae Adams is getting close to 30 now, and there's just so many guys like Cooper Kupp is awesome, but he's going to be 20. Is he 29 or is he going to be 29 next year?
He's going to be, but
yeah, he's 28.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many of the point, and the running backs, Cook and Elliott and all those guys, McCaffrey, are all aging now. So I'm just not as enticed by passing up on. It's not even that I want to draft quarterbacks. Really, I'm not sure who else to draft in a lot of cases. So.
I think and this is a little off topic here, but a couple of things you've said have just made me think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the class of 2017, that running back class specifically changed Dynasty.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
so many, just the volume and how good they've been. I mean, Kamara and Cook and Mixon and
wasn't Jones in that class too?
Later? Yeah, Aaron Jones. Yeah, and I know I'm definitely Leonard Fournette, Cook. Yeah, so there's just so many, right? And they changed Dynasty 100% because that's really where strategies like Productive Struggle were born. Not because we didn't like the running back position, just because the running backs were terrible, right? There just wasn't that level of talent, and I noticed, and plenty of other people noticed as well. We're drafting these running backs in the first round, and the next year they're out of the league or they've lost their starting job. Like, what are we doing here? We're taking this redraft mentality and trying to apply it to Dynasty, and it just wasn't working. And so you talk about Productive Struggle changing. I mean, the 2017 running back class changed it, and it changed our strategy across the board. And now in a lot of ways, it's changing it again, because now these guys are 26, 27, 28 years old. And we've got this decision of, do we still treat these guys like first rounders, like elite Dynasty assets? I mean, did we even say Christian McCaffrey? He's in that class as well.
Yes,
I think we might have left him out. But yeah, they're changing it again because they've almost created a divide of, I'm sticking with these guys, I'm going to ride them out one more year, versus get out while you can. Pivot to the young, pivot to Javonte Williams or pivot to any of the top 15 wide receivers. If I can get any top 15, even a top 20 wide receiver for Cook or for Kamara, like, do it. So you've got to kind of pick your side now. So it's really interesting that I think they're having such a big impact, that group of running backs still.
Well, I mean, again, a lot of that though is this time of year we say this every week, don't buy running backs right now, right? You don't need to worry about them. You don't need to worry about a roster. And I think we all would probably agree the running backs, the riskiest, the cliff is steeper and closer for most running backs than we want to admit. And I think that we see Gurley, right? He was literally a top 5 or top 6 running back. And then the next year was out of the league. Right. And then like Christian McCaffrey has had 2 bad years with injuries and all this. And he's still, going in most first or second rounds, but we're still seeing him dropping something. Barkley, perfect example, right? Like we see it all the time. And so that's just what makes it's what makes that whole class, like you almost said it, like it broke Dynasty for a minute. And I'm wondering if maybe we're going to go back to that because we're going to see fewer running backs. And so at some point, maybe that pushes with the ones that are left up the board a little, because there's only 3 left that are bell cow. right? I mean, like Jonathan Taylor, for instance, is still a pretty steady number 1 or number 2 overall, however you want to word it in one QB. I don't know if maybe you could say Eckler if he tries to get to that next level. I mean, there's a couple of those guys that could maybe jump up there, but I don't see that many doing it. And I think we were all kind of spoiled with that class and having, 5 or 6 or 7 running backs in the top 20 of dynasty startups. I don't know if we ever get back there, but that changes the whole thing around now, because now do you go for running back? Because there's so few of them. I mean, we always have to play this game of where are we going next,
Yeah. Eckler was in that class too, just undrafted.
Undrafted.
Yeah. That's true.
And to Ryan's point, how it's still influencing things. I mean, it was so much more enticing for the last several years to even buy running back, even in February, because those guys were scoring you so many points. And now that they're all becoming 26, 27, it's a lot easier to just, fade them and move on. That kind of leads into the next point I wanted to talk about, which was, it's kind of a pet topic of our podcast in general, is talking about dynasty, what Al Hausler Russ likes to call dynasty value versus fantasy value, versus points. Obviously, from our discussion so far tonight, I definitely know, Ryan, that's you're going way more dynasty value in a startup for sure.
Sure.
That's basically what the productive struggle is basically all about. I more wanted to get into maybe a little bit with trades, and this also lead into my other startup I'll bring up in a little bit. But are you like willing to sacrifice points for dynasty value in trades? I guess it's easier during the non-point scoring season. So I'm curious, especially in season, like if you feel like you're getting the better value, but it's a guy who might not score you this year, and you're at least in the mix, or is that something you're doing just because you're getting the value?
I mean, not every time, not
basically case by case basis.
Right. Yeah. It's got to be case by case. Not only with the players, but with the team you've got. Right. I mean, and it's always got to be that, like Andrew was saying earlier with the person he was helping out. If you're always going to say, I'm taking the younger guy, or I'm going to take the guy that I think is going to be worth more in a year, you're going to be in that perpetual productive struggle. And that's not where you want to be. Right. I mean, the productive struggle is a temporary thing. Like,
you still got to be productive. You know what I mean? Like at some point you got to produce.
And I mean, that's I've talked about it on other podcasts, maybe on here before as well, but I mean, productive struggle is an educational term. I'm a teacher, and as far as my day job, and basically the simple explanation behind that is you allow students to struggle because you think they're going to discover the answer, the path, the right way, whatever, on their own, right, versus giving them too much guidance and basically giving them the answer or telling them too much information. So it's kind of a self-discovery thing. But I mean, unfortunately, we have students who are more on the struggling end than the being productive. And, it is a case-by-case basis. And it's not to say I'm going to let every student figure it out themselves.
Right.
Because honestly, some are just not going to get there, or some need more guidance than others. So,
and some that's struggling can be really like just demoralizing and be like, why am I doing this? And it's just like it. I've actually had some friends that tried to do a productive struggle, and then after that year, they hated it. They were like, I don't like my team. I don't like this game anymore. Like it's that same kind of thing. It just becomes, you have to have the right mindset.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly it too. Like there's more to it than that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's certainly not for everybody. So, I mean, just as students would be a case-by-case basis, dynasty teams would as well. And you've got to know when to intervene with a student, when to offer that help. You've got to know when to make that move in dynasty, either way, right? Either direction of, okay, I'm going to trade these 23 first for Russell Wilson, and I'm making my move. Like I'm going for it. Right. Or the other direction. I don't have it this year. Maybe I sneak into the playoffs, but this is not my year. So I'm pivoting the other direction. So no, I would not always take value, especially during the regular season. You're right. It's easier to do in the off season for sure. Again, that's one of those things everybody's doing.
Right.
But I mean, I like to, I like to buy years, right? Like I like to go from older players to younger players, not just to do it, not just to get the younger guy or the one who's climbing in ADP or whatever, but I'm trading Devontae Adams for Elijah Moore because I think they're going to score close enough in 2022. And then I think Moore takes over from there. Right. So that's kind of the idea behind the type of trade you're talking about.
Well, and two, just with that same exact mindset, I mean, at some point, Elijah Moore will be worth more than Devontae Adams. We don't know when that point is, but that will almost definitely occur. And so what it really comes down to is you're trying to predict the market. You're trying to predict as close as you can to where they're the same, but descending versus ascending, right? Like that's the whole point in the value trade. And then the points trade,
that might be right now though.
Sure.
Like, don't you think if you're in 10 leagues with Devontae and you've got Devontae Adams, if you offer that trade 1-for-1 right now, you're not getting it in all 10. Like no way. It might be a half and half thing already. So,
right.
A little bit of it is getting ahead of the market. And productive struggle does not always work. If it did, everybody would do it. Right. And, and because young players don't always work out. You guys know, I love Juju Smith-Schuster and,
yes.
and he was kind of my guy and he still is. But if you paid 101 prices for him, or if you pivoted off of Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill or whoever, DeAndre Hopkins or someone like that 2 or 3 years ago, you probably don't feel great about that right now.
Yep. True.
Yeah. And every decision basically in Dynasty, whether it's a startup or a trade, basically comes down to weighing how much you weigh Dynasty value versus production value. And it's something I've been trying to work on ever since I started Dynasty, because I've very much been, if it's a scale, my production value side is up here, and the Dynasty value a lot of times is down here. That's why I tend to go. I tended to be the opposite of Ryan. I think part of it's I don't have the patience for productive struggle, and I always try and win now. That's part of what goes behind my quarterback strategy is you can win now doing that, because you can. I don't worry as much about security, and I trust my ability to trade for guys if I have a Brady, which I have on many teams, or things like that I drafted in a startup. He scored me a bunch of points this year, and now I have to replace him. And I basically that's what you're doing with every decision you make. So getting to the Dynasty value point and leading to my startup, this other startup. When you're in 30 plus leagues, you can try different things. So what I'm trying to do this time is maybe not be patient, but I'm trying to go way more on Dynasty value, not worry so much about production. Now we're in the 4th round. I haven't traded here. This is the exact opposite of the other startup. I started at 108. This is a 12-teamer, so I had 205, and it's a 3rd round reversal, so I also had 305. And I took Jonathan Taylor at 108, and then there were I think it was 6 quarterbacks and somebody else. I guess it was Chase maybe, one of them. And I got Trey Lance at 205, which I'm not even a huge Trey Lance guy, although I am warming up to him. That's something I learned this past year. A little side tangent is I was kind of down on Lance. We talked about it last summer, I believe, Andrew. Just because I wasn't sure what kind of passer he'd be. And I've kind of decided it doesn't matter. I saw Jalen Hurts and what he did this year. And I love Jalen Hurts. I'm an Eagles fan, but he's not that great of a passer, and it didn't matter. Right. He was a mid to low end QB1, depending on your scoring. So I like the value, and he's definitely a value type guy. And then this is a what we'll call limited Devy league, where we're going to have a separate Devy draft afterwards. And you can only pick players in the 23 class. So that's the limited part of it. And my 3rd pick was the Devy 101. Because I figured what was left on the board, I didn't think anybody was going to be worth more than Bijan Robinson, or possibly, in QB1, in a year. So I was good, and I told the guys I was going to have you guys make my pick. I still want to try and do this, but it's a lot harder, or not make my pick, but help me make my pick. Because MFL does not have ADP, so these guys are all over the place. Because we just had the rollovers. I'm going to try and run through real fast. Just some of the guys.
I'm working on it.
That's right. DLF mock drafts, right? I'm in one. I'm helping.
That's always the appeal of the February mocks is get in here and help make ADP. You're creating ADP, and then all the best ball guys hate us.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're
So I'm
ruining
trying
it.
to see who like in terms of the picks, I can tell you the 2022 and the rookie picks are in the draft too. So the 2022 102 is the highest pick left. The Devy 106 is the highest pick left. So people going for those 23s. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm trying to pick out who might be the best. Like I said, they're in a random kind of order here. I'm just looking at guys that would seem to have at least some value going for. Antonio Gibson is in here.
wait, Rocky, do you not have a spreadsheet going? Do you not have at least a checklist or something?
You don't use a magazine? What the heck, man? Come on.
No, I did. I normally prepare for a startup, and I really didn't. So I was kind of winging it. That's why I don't. I would have normally my own rankings before I started, but he started this right after the rollover, and I've been meaning all week to kind of make a list of the guys that are left, but I haven't done it. So.
Well, shout out Fantasy Pros. I tend to use a lot of their ECR and stuff like that too, just because I feel like it helps wash some of my biases out. But I'm right there with you. Like I usually have some sort of a listing I look at outside of MFL, but it's tricky right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're at I'm at the 408. I'd say Antonio Gibson looks like one of the higher running backs. I mean, Dalvin Cook is there, but he's going to lose value. He would have production value.
In the 4th round though. Wow.
Yeah. Deontay Johnson.
Oh, that's your boy.
So
it is my boy.
Five Devy picks went before Dalvin Cook.
Wow.
Yes.
And not even okay. So hang on for a
Eric
second.
Henry's still there as well.
But you can't, and you can't even take Travion. You can't take Travion. It's 5 guys from the 23
class. Yeah.
Well, I'm saying like I don't mind when you have like taking 5 23 first and like playing that lottery of who gets the 101. You know the 101 is off the table. I'm not sure I'd take the 102 before a lot of these players, like just because like I don't know who the second play. I mean, we barely know Bijan's going to be the guy, right? Like we're a year out. Everybody thought last year we all knew who it was going to be, and it's not. Like this is definitely an interesting draft. I'm surprised at this.
So yeah, Deontay is there. I'm trying to see who else that would have significant value.
Well, you got Taylor,
Dobbins
so
is still on the board. Tight end. It looks like most of the elite guys have been taken. Kelsey is there, but that's not value.
Who's available at quarterback though?
Quarterback is it is, but they're not. They pretty much Tua, Mac Jones, Tannehill, Cousins. It's kind of that range is what's left. A lot of quarterbacks have gone off.
Zach Wilson, is he available? I know you love Zach Wilson. Just kidding. Just kidding.
I actually am not sure he's here, but again, because they're in all kinds of weird order.
Yeah.
I think Deontay's my favorite name.
I was going to say the same. I think Deontay, of all the names you've listed, I think that's the one that it also fits your team nice. You know, it's your team. That's your guy. And you've already got Taylor, so you're doing my hero running back. Like you don't need to draft another running back for a while. You got Bijan coming next year. Like I would probably hit that wide receiver position. Honestly, maybe I'm alone on this island, but I think Deontay's in that wide receiver 2 to become a wide receiver 1 phrase this year. You know, and
he was a wide receiver 1 in 21.
Exactly, but I think he could easily be even better than this year with a better quarterback, right? I mean, so like that seems like a slam dunk to me at that value.
By the way, Saquon is there.
You've got Taylor. You don't need. I'm telling you, you don't need. You got Taylor. Who is the other player you got? Taylor, Lance, Bijan, and this pick, right?
Yeah.
You got to go Johnson. He's your wide receiver 1. Lock it in, man. I love it.
One last one, and then
is Waddle gone?
Waddle went in the second.
Yeah.
I'm just looking. The best available tight end is TJ Hawkinson. So we going Deontay over TJ. It is 1.75 if that matters.
No,
I would because you don't have any receivers at this point. I would be teeing that up and then seeing who the tight ends fall. But I would probably go receiver. You know, if their quarterbacks are already at that level, it might be a while. You might end up with like a Baker in the 9th round. I've seen that happen in some startups. So that's my 2 cents. That's just my 2 cents.
Debo and T. Higgins both gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Godwin, I'm guessing, is gone.
No, Godwin would be there.
Well, I feel like he's in that same range as Deontay. Just, he might have mentioned him. Because I feel like Godwin's one of those guys that we could see a big spike in free agency, depending on where he lands. Almost anywhere, I think, is going to up his value. And I think it's going to be worth it. I think he's a good player. But I might put Deontay over him. I'm just curious if he's there.
Godwin is there.
I'd rather have Deontay.
I think I would too.
I know you would, Rocky. That's what I'm saying. You should. That's your guy. I'm telling you, like, go for it, man. What are you waiting for? You're just looking through the list because you don't know who you're missing. That's the annoying part, right?
I know. If it was like a month from now, yeah, we would have it would be a little more organized.
Again, we're working.
Ryan's working on it. But yeah, T went at the 306. Debo went at 310.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, there's a bunch of QBs going. It's
T above Debo. Ooh,
yeah. And actually, Zach Wilson is available.
He's gonna go in like the 1-2 turn of one quarterback startups this offseason.
Probably right.
Yeah. It's this postseason didn't hurt him. Okay, so Deontay pick is in. So
I think it's the one.
So we will move on. We'll get to the listener questions, and then we'll go to find me a trade, because I did a couple people were nice enough to ask a question here. Listener question from Tommy Blair, he, him, at Tommy BL, and a bunch of numbers. Sorry, Tommy, I don't feel like reading the numbers. Can you get into the pros and cons of being a contender rostering 2 elite tight ends in a typical non-premium format? Any thoughts on that one, Ryan?
Ooh, it sounds like you're more suited to answer that one. You said you like to get that elite tight end.
I like it for the positional advantage, though. And if you're rostering 2 of them, you're only getting the positional advantage really with one of them. You're starting the other one over a receiver or running back or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the advantage, if the advantage is, if there's 4 studs, you've got 2 of them. Right. And there's only 2 other teams, so it basically widens your
the advantage.
It widens your advantage at that tight end.
Everybody else, yeah,
right. Honestly, I don't like it. I mean, I don't invest in tight end early. Generally, I don't pay up in trades for elite tight ends typically. So it would not be my play. And as far as having 2 of them, there's just so many wide receivers that are startable week in and week out. And that's kind of all.
And I'm with you, right? Like we listed the pros, basically playing keep away. And if you have like 2 really elite tight ends, like you're saying, like the top 4 guys, you can probably start them over a lot of receivers and things like that. If you have like Kelsey and Andrews or something like that. But yeah, I'm not even there. Especially he mentioned in a typical non-premium format, I'm even less inclined to do something like that. So yeah, I'm pretty much with Ryan. Any thoughts on this, Andrew, before we move on to the other question?
Yeah, the only word I would pick on is the contender part, right? Okay, so if I'm a contender and I'm looking at myself as like I've got a great team everywhere, that reduces your flexibility on those weeks when you might need it. Right, you might need a little bit extra flexibility, and you pretty much got to put a tight end in one of your flex spots. Well, you're kind of limiting your upside maybe on some of those other weeks you might need it. However, what I'm looking at is that what I would probably do if I had this, I would trade one of them to a non-contender for one of their better players, right? And just kind of like trade it to someone who you don't have to contend with, because then it's basically the same thought process where you've only got, let's say there's 4 stud tight ends, and you have three competitors are going to have the others. Well, if one of them's not a competitor, you still only have 2, right? Like it's the same basic logic. You're not really helping if you're trading it to a team that's 1-6. So I'm not trading it now. That's for sure. You don't have to trade anything. But I think that's probably where I would look at that and say, what teams are at the bottom of the barrel that have, I don't know, like a Christian McCaffrey on their roster, and they're like, you know what, I'm not contending. Maybe I can get McCaffrey for one of those guys, or make a trade. I'm not doing a 1-for-1 per se, but like maybe you can make a trade like that happen leading up to the season and bolster your running back or your receiver group, depending on how the summer goes. So that's probably what I would do if I'm a contender, but it's a tricky one. I've done it in one league, and honestly, I didn't like it. I didn't like having to always start those 2. It came in handy for the bye weeks, but that was the only time I really felt okay about it, because it was like, oh, thank God, I only have to start 1. It's just kind of odd. It wasn't my thing.
Like I said, I like it better in heavy premium leagues. I'm in some 1.75 and 2.0, and I don't mind flexing. Yeah, if I can flex it, an Andrews or a Kelsey there, it's a lot more beneficial.
It's a double pow, yeah. But in non-premium, it just, I don't know, it doesn't really do enough for me.
Yeah, and actually, one more question I wanted to ask both of you before we move on to the final listener question, which was, because I did mention this at the top about kind of getting into how rookie drafts shape your team building strategy. I guess Andrew, I'll ask you first. Do you? I know a lot of people say they like to go for the running backs in the rookie drafts. Put the rest of your team together, get them in the rookie drafts, get them while they're young. Do you have positions you tend to favor? I mean, obviously in Superflex, if you have an early pick, you're usually going to go quarterback. But how do you tend to handle rookie drafts and supplementing your team? Obviously, would like to go best player available, but what does that usually mean for you?
Well, I mean, you're hitting it on the head there. It's draft for value, trade for need, right? Like I'm going to draft for whatever the best value is on the board at the rookie draft, because again, it's usually in May or June or what have you. And I don't need a lineup. So I don't really care if I have no running backs on my roster. If the best available player is Jalen Waddle or I don't know, like a Michael Carter, I'm going to take Waddle every day. But again, a lot of that comes down to, comes down to your league scoring and how your format is and all that. And I mean, you might have a list of players that you really like, and you have an order and a ranking that might be different from league to league. I know that there are some leagues too where you've got guys that are, I don't know, Alabama fans, and they draft Alabama players early. And you got to know that if you want to get the Alabama guy because you think his value is good too. So you always have to play the league. But I don't tend to look at my roster really at all when I'm doing rookie drafts. I just kind of go, well, what player I think has the most ability to either stay or gain value between now and the time I need to use them. And that's pretty much how I play every decision I make. Like, why not? Why now? I say that on every trade. Why am I making this trade today? Is there something that happened that I'm capitalizing on? If not, I should wait. Why force it? But that's generally how I play
it. And Ryan, I'm going to ask you the same question. I guess sort of getting to what Andrew says. If you're going best player available, it's I agree. We pretty much always should get the value and all that kind of stuff. I guess we generally are a super flex ran a podcast, but the quarterbacks are the easy answer. So we'll take that out of the equation. Are you, and most people aren't drafting tight ends very early unless they're Kyle Pitts anyway. So yeah. Are you breaking the tie with receiver if you're pretty close on both guys?
Yeah, I mean, my answer would almost be exactly the same as Andrew's. I guess the only thing I would add is it seems like when you get later in the draft, back half of the second, certainly into the third and fourth round, I think that's where it's probably smarter to gamble on running backs versus wide receivers.
Good point. Yep.
But yeah, in general, I'm just taking the best player available. I'm not, not really considering my roster at all. Maybe it's a tiebreaker, but that's usually not even the case.
The only thing I will add to this is there have been, I remember now after I say this, there have been a couple of drafts where I know my team is in no shape contending, and I am not looking to win at all this year. And I feel like then I might tie break to the receiver because again, I feel like they hold their value a little bit longer. But I can't remember a single pick where I was like, where the gap was big enough where I was like, yeah, no, usually the gap is what it is because I believe the running back is better than that receiver, that tier drop, right? There's a tier of running backs. I have a tier 1 running back available and a tier 2 receiver. I'm almost always picking the running back, even if I don't need them, because in the next couple of weeks, I'm probably going to trade them. And I know you guys have talked about this on Trade Addicts too, but like, I can't think of a single team that I've kept every player on for more than a month. You know what I mean? Like I'm cycling through stuff, and there are definitely teams where a year later, I have none of the same players on my team. So it's like, I don't really care about roster. I just care about value and what can I do to make that better. So
I'm glad you said that, Andrew, because I was going to bring that point up as well. But like, if you're rebuilding, I know a lot of times people don't want to draft running backs in the first. You think they are clearly the better player. You draft. I've done that multiple times in rebuild. I remember I while back I drafted Miles Sanders in a rookie draft, just because I thought he was the best player available, and I traded him within it was definitely within 6 months. I think it was before the season, so it might have been less than 6 months. But yeah, and I ended up getting I forget who it was, but some good young receiver back for him. So it worked out well. So yeah, don't just think I don't want running backs because I'm rebuilding.
And a quick anecdote, I just remembered that you mentioned the Miles Sanders year. That was the year I drafted Josh Jacobs, and the guy who had traded up to right behind me because he knew I wasn't contending. He was like, well, I can probably trade up to there and still get Jacobs. So I took Jacobs, and then he traded me for his pick on the block and gave me something else. And it was a younger receiver. And I was like, okay, you can have, I don't want Jacobs anyway. So I got I forget who it was now, but it was like something like Calvin Ridley and his first for Josh Jacobs and my third or something like that. And I was just like, yeah, like what, of course, but again, like that trade never would have happened if I stood the path and took the receiver. Like, no, took the best player available. Someone else is going to want that running back. Those guys are hard to find.
And then one last thing I just want to emphasize. I thought Ryan made a great point there. But I definitely have in the past couple of years gone to later picks, almost always favoring running back because you always occasionally get those guys that'll hit like to a great extent, like Elijah Mitchell. But even more so, you'll get like just guys, Ramondre Stevenson, or even a Jared Patterson who'll get a 20-point game and get a value bump. Yeah, Kenneth Gainwell, guys like that they get that starter injury, and even though they're never going to be the guy, that you can trade them for a second after you pick them.
They outscored guys like De'Ami Brown and Amari Rodgers and like all these other, you know what I mean? Like all those players.
And that's the thing; it doesn't happen with receivers
that were supposed to be amazing, and then just crickets. So yeah, it's a good point. Terrific point.
Yep. Okay, so last question from Bryce Williams at Bryce NFL, and I'll throw this to you first, Ryan. While there is no wrong way to play Dynasty, what is the strategy you question the most based on the results?
Ooh, which one do you question the most? Which one are you the least favorite? Maybe is a way to put it, but that's not even really fair. I like the way you worded this, Bryce. That's well played.
Yeah, I mean, I really think those guys who just punt on quarterbacks and Superflex are crazy. No, I mean he's right with his first statement that there is no wrong way. Like unless you're just doing something totally crazy that's you never see any success from, then find what works for you. That's what makes Dynasty awesome. Productive struggle is certainly not for everybody. A lot of people say, Rocky, like you, that you want to try to compete every single year, and that's fine. So, I mean, I guess I almost have to say like all in win now in the startup is, well, actually, let me say this. Years ago, I would have said all in win now is the one I would agree with the least. Like because if you don't win in year one, now what? Now, all your guys, basically all of your key players have lost value. And then some of them have potentially even lost their job, lost their role with their team. So the caveat to that lately is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Everybody's building their team around younger players, because not only are the younger players the ones who are valuable early on, but also they're scoring. They're scoring more and more. I said we were seeing the average age of the top 12 and top 24 in ADP drop every year. We're also seeing the average age of the top 12 and top 24 scorers, fantasy producers, drop every single year. I mean, it used to be like probably before you guys were even playing Dynasty, like the third year wide receiver was a thing, right? That was a real thing that we waited 3 years.
Yeah.
Like we waited 3 years for guys to produce at wide receiver. And now we're giving up on, Rondale Moore after 1 year or Terrace Marshall or whoever. Probably should give up on him, by the way. But, yeah, we're seeing the average age of top 12 scorers drop every year as well. So you can have that win now team and still have some young pieces, some cornerstone pieces. So I don't have as much, contempt for the all-in teams anymore, because there's a good chance you're winning a year one title and you've still got a lot of nice young cornerstone pieces on your team.
That's a good answer.
My politically correct answer will be that I just don't like having.
Pretend I'm not here, Rocky. Say what you want to say.
Is that I don't like having one rigid strategy. Like I know some people will do the same thing every time, over and over, regardless of how the draft is going. I am not a fan of that. I'm not. I mentioned earlier I like to draft elite tight ends. I like. I'm more of a running back guy than a lot of Dynasty people are, but it depends how the draft is going. So if everyone's drafting running backs, I'm not drafting running backs just because I like to draft. I want to draft running backs. So then I'll take the value elsewhere. It's part of the reason I've even leaned more into the quarterback thing is everyone's taking quarterbacks anyway. So I'll just wait a little longer and get my point producers that nobody likes, like Kirk Cousins. So that's going to be my answer. I just don't have a rigid strategy. Go, see how your draft goes. Maybe try different things like I'm doing with these 2 startups. Have tendencies, but don't be too rigid.
I like that. That's a good answer.
Mine
is mine is more of what irks me, I guess. I don't know if it's what I like the least. I mean, again, there is no wrong way. You said it perfectly, Bryce. I mean, we're all on the same page. If it makes you happy, if you're having fun with it, go for it, right? If it's not collusion, it's legal, so you're good. I've seen some interesting trades on Twitter, and you're like, well, they both agreed to it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not collusion, then it's allowed. I wouldn't have done that, but if you go get your guy, man, you do what you got to do. But the one that irks me, and it feels weird saying that, but the one I like the least, I'll go with that, is when people trade back in years, and I mean in draft picks. So if you're on the clock at 110 and you trade for a 23 first and a 23 second, and then in 23 you're trading that pick for a 24, you know what I mean? Just make the pick or trade it for a player. Like, just gaining all of those picks looks great, but you're not winning titles with that. And so I feel like and I don't mind doing it once in a while or doing it, 1 year, but I've been in a league for 3 years with one guy who always seems to have 8 picks in the next draft. And then it's just like, at some point, man, you got to go all in. Like, at some point you got to win it. You can't be sitting on the sideline. So, and again, that's not how I play it. And I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just that irks me, where it's like, you've got a lot of draft capital. That's great. But when do you turn that into points, right? To kind of get to what we said before. And if you're not going to turn it into points, I mean, that's one way to play Dynasty. Never win and always have a ton of great picks and, have a great roster, great. Okay. But at some point you got to win the title, right? You win dynasties by winning and not by just having a ton of great picks. So I always tell people too, like, if let's say you've got 7 picks in the upcoming rookie draft, trade some of those out and get players, or consolidate and move up or something. But like, you don't need that many picks. And there are definitely times where that happens because there are teams that have 0 picks, right? Where they trade all their rookie picks. And so like, there's one league, I've got 1 rookie pick. Well, someone's got 8. You're not going to make all 8 of those picks. And I might trade in at that point. But if you're not going to be active in trading and you're just gathering picks, that bothers me. But that's a personal thing. If it makes you happy, go for it.
And then one last thing, sorry, before we move on to Find Me a Trade, I wanted to, since Ridley Truther had asked a question in the chat, I wanted to throw it up here. In a 12-team Superflex PPR, are Diggs, Godwin, and Darnold too much for Higgins and Dobbins? Hopeful playoff team again, trying to get a little younger. Ryan, what do you think?
No, easy deal. Easy deal to make. I mean, you could argue Godwin and Higgins are close. I mean, really, the 2 for 2 there.
I think we can take enough. Darnold out of the equation.
Yeah, right. The 2 for 2 is close enough. You're getting a little younger, which he says is part of the goal. And I mean, Darnold, in Superflex, he's an asset, but not enough that it matters. If that's the price you're paying for buying years, maybe if you've got a need at running back, so you can pivot from 2 wide receivers to running back wide receiver, I like the deal quite a bit.
And I'm with you, Ryan. I don't see, I don't think you're getting much of a fall, if any, in production, and you're buying back the years. So I don't really see the downside there. You on board with that, Andrew?
Yeah, but I would look at it a little bit differently. And it's my trade brain comes in here, where it's like, if you feel like that's too much, then add a 2023 second and send it, right? Like, go ahead and send Diggs, Godwin, and Darnold for Higgins, Dobbins, and another piece, right? If you feel like that's too much, then don't worry about asking for a little more, right? Now you get your guys and a bonus. You get a little icing on your cake too. And then if they say no, you're like, all right, great. Take out that piece I just added and I'll do it. And you're still happy. Right. Like, that's kind of where I do with a lot of those trades, where I'm like, man, that feels like a lot. I don't, yeah, I'll send it. But then at the same time, you get smash accept. You're like, I could have gotten more. Right. Like, and that hurts all the time. So it's like, well, I'd rather ask for more and negotiate down to where I was fine anyway. So I don't think it's a bad trade at all. I'm with you guys. I would probably rather have the Higgins Dobbins side myself. A year ago, it would have been exactly the opposite, but that's Dynasty, isn't it? Right. Like, a year from now, we might look at this and go, man, Diggs balled out again. What were we thinking? But I'd rather have Higgins and Dobbins. I think those two are both going to be top 12 of their position. And Diggs probably could be. Godwin, I don't think will. And yeah, Darnold's kind of meh. But if you can get another piece, why not? Send it off or see what you can get.
Yeah, and plus there's also a lot of question marks around Godwin. Where's he going to be? Who's going to be his quarterback? All the injury, all that kind of stuff.
Now's the perfect time to ask for 23 seconds and thirds, right? Like now's the time that those picks are getting a little bit undervalued, I think, because we're all looking at this rookie class coming in, and you can easily sneak a second or a third on your roster. Kind of what I was saying before, to use in a trade later, not to hold and hoard, but get another piece that you could push in on another trade that makes it go over the edge, and you got that third for free. So what do you care? Right, that's kind of where I go with some of this.
Okay, so we'll now get into our Find Me a Trade segment and finish up here. This week's was submitted by Nate at Nathan_Roarth on Twitter. Andrew, do you mind? You want to get in the settings while I'll pull up the roster here? You're muted.
I have the roster up if you wanted to do the
settings. I'll do the settings and you pull up the roster and go through that. Okay, 12 team. Half PPR, Superflex 1.0 tight end premium, only 20-man rosters and only start 9. So shallow rosters, shallow starting lineup. Starts a QB, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, Superflex spot, then 2 flexes. They do have 5 taxi spots to expand the roster a little more. I guess I'll get into his little description here, and then you can go into the roster. It's a little longer than one of our normal ones, but I just love the way how he laid it out so formally. So he says his background is this was my first Dynasty and auction startup. Goal was to punt RB, build around elite QBs, wide receivers, and tight end. After the auction, liked my team, but realized I jumped on too many cheap wide receiver values early that limited me from bidding up on studs later. But his 221 result, the 2021 result was by streaming running backs off the waiver wire. He went 8-6 and made the playoffs. Was unable to flip my 22 first-round pick into a competitive RB and lost in the semifinals. Landed the 107 draft slot. And he says 2022 goals. The decision for my team now becomes either tear down every starter to generate more assets or consolidate my picks and bench players to upgrade starters or possibly buy depressed RB assets for 22. Does believe he should aim to be either first or last in the league and not in between, which I think everyone always kind of agrees with. You don't want to be in the middle there. As a start 9 league, I feel like I should prioritize upgrading the starters and worry about depth later, which I also agree with. So let's get into his roster.
All right. So again, this is a super flex, but it's a short roster, short start. I mean, that's an interesting combo. We haven't seen that one yet, but he's got Justin Herbert, Baker Mayfield, Dak Prescott, Sam Darnold on IR, and Mitchell Trubisky as quarterbacks. That's a solid 5 quarterbacks. I mean, I think that's pretty damn good for a league this short.
Well, he's got Trey Lance also.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yes. Trey Lance on the taxi. That's right. Trey Lance on the taxi.
4 starting quarterbacks. Yeah,
4 starting and 6 quarterbacks that are worth rostering. So I don't blame you there. Running backs a little bit messier. He's got Amir Abdullah, Benjamin Eno, Devontae Booker. Or Eno Benjamin, Devontae Booker, Malcolm Brown, Jamar Jefferson, Dearness Johnson, Giovanni Bernard, and Kenway Iwangwu, which again, it's a little weak, I would say. Receivers,
Just a little.
It's a little weak. Devontae Booker being your best running back hurts my soul, but that's okay. I get it. You got DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson, Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, Cortland Sutton, Elijah Moore, who we talked about, De'Ami Brown, who we talked about. Pretty good receiver core. I think that's a Ryan team right there. That's like building around the receiver group for sure. And then tight end, we've got Evan Ingram, Noah Fant, Hunter Henry, Harrison Bryant, and Brevin Jordan on the taxi down there. So yeah, this is an interesting team. So I'll kick it back to you, Rocky. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'll go into my trade first then. And we all it's funny, we all kind of had similar idea, but kind of I feel like went in a slightly different direction with it. I'm going to trade Trey Lance and Rondale Moore, even though I am starting to like Trey Lance a little more, to team just named Alex for Jalen Waddle and Elijah Mitchell. I didn't think I was mainly looking at Waddle, but I liked adding Mitchell. I didn't think I could pull Waddle and Mitchell with just Trey Lance. So I like adding Rondale Moore, especially because for me, he's not a guy I'm really believing in at this point. I think this was actually DLF Pod Dynasty Refinery with Cal, who was in the chat earlier, and Adam Harstead. I think they mentioned that Rondale Moore had a negative ADOT if you take out his one 80-yard touchdown this year. So I don't trust Rondale Moore going forward in that offense. But I do think he has value to others, so I love adding him in here. I'm looking to upgrade the starting lineup. I think it's a waste, especially with the short rosters and the short starting lineup, to have 3 potential stud QBs. And a lot of people, I feel like, do view Lance that way. And he already has Herbert and Dak. And even if you trade Lance away, you still have Baker as a third. So to me, it's sort of a waste of assets to have that much that you can't start at one time with such short benches. So I want to move one of them. Waddle would immediately become his most valuable wide receiver. At worst, even if he regresses a little, at worst, his probably wide receiver 2 to Deontay. Mitchell adds a startable running back, and I like Mitchell a lot. There's the narrative in San Francisco that they're always revolving running backs, but really Shanahan has tended to stick with one guy until he gets hurt. I mean, we saw that with Mitchell this year, and then immediately when he came back, they were giving him all the carries again. So pretty much he got hurt multiple times. That's the one issue. He does have the injuries, but other than that, I like having it's easily his best running back. And Alex looks to be rebuilding. He has multiple firsts and seconds. His only QBs are Stafford and Goff, which are not ideal rebuilding quarterbacks. So he gets Lance here. Waddle is a nice rebuild piece himself, but I feel like he can more easily replace him with either Rondale if he likes him or some of his first round or second round picks. He can, like as we said earlier, it's a good wide receiver class. So maybe he's okay moving on from Waddle to get the quarterback. So I kind of liked it from his end as well. What do you think of that one, Ryan?
Yeah, I don't like that one.
Hey, if you don't like it, let me know.
Well, I mean, I still let's see where to start. I still have some hope for Rondale Moore. So, from my point of view, that feels like selling him low. Now, I will say, if you agree with Rocky that you're ready to move on, now's the time, because Rocky, you made a good point. He does still have value. So that's kind of an eye of the beholder thing. I think Trey Lance's value is only going to go up. I mean, Garoppolo hasn't even gotten traded yet. So if you are interested in moving him, and I did think you made a really good point about with the short benches, almost has too many quarterbacks. Even I would say that as the quarterback hoarder. But if you're willing or even interested in trading Lance, I think you wait it out a little bit. We all kind of know what's going to happen, but once it actually does, it's like one of those counting it twice kind of things. Yep. Lance's value has gone up because we're like 90% sure Garoppolo's getting traded. When he does, it's going to go up even more when we're 100% sure of it. I love Waddle. I mean, everybody loves Waddle, so I don't have any issue with him. Mitchell, I don't trust as much. I mean, the good news is Mitchell came back to be the starter every time he got hurt. The bad news is he got hurt 3 times in 1 year. So, just not a player I would necessarily be targeting at his current price right now.
But honestly, Ryan, I appreciate you saying I didn't like that one, because too many times on this, and we do this with the guests as well. I think sometimes we're all trying to be too polite to each other, and not that you weren't polite, but it was just it's always nice to have a little disagreement on the pod. I think I'm a little higher on Mitchell than you are. I still feel like Lance has most of that value is baked in. You may be right. It's probably going to go up a little bit, but I do think most of that Garoppolo was gone value was baked in once they lost in the championship game.
Yeah, and I mean, once I get into my trade here, it goes back to our startup and team building strategy. Like that kind of shifted over into these trades we came up with, and that's fine. Again, that's the good part about Dynasty,
as it should.
Okay, Ryan, why don't we get right into yours then?
Sure. I tried to take advantage in one way, at least, of that quarterback depth as well. I came up with sending Dak Prescott to the team that must not be named for Justin Fields and Miles Sanders. And according to the trade analyzer at DLF, which of course we love, you'd actually be losing this trade a little bit. 846 for Dak, 765 for Fields plus Sanders. So the trade analyzer says that deal can get done. Now that we're in the offseason, I'm not sure that deal could actually get done. Dak's going one direction and Fields is going the other. So that may be a tough trade to even pull off, but if it can happen, I like it. He mentioned kind of either wanting to be first or last. I don't think this is a first place roster. I don't know that you're one trade away from a first place roster. So pairing Fields with Lance, obviously you're shooting for the stars there. You might end up with 2 top 5 dynasty values overall this time next year. And then I love buying low on Miles Sanders right now. I think he's super undervalued. Those are the types of running backs I buy in the offseason. The bounce back guys or the ones I expect to bounce back who have lost a little bit of value.
I hate it, Ryan. No,
I'm kidding. I knew you would.
I'm joking. That one, I mean, it's not something I would do though, obviously. But I do get where you're going with it. I actually feel it's maybe, Dak, I guess are you looking at him as a descending asset? I just feel like he's a little low right now. That he's another guy I'd rather hold on to and maybe reap the production. I think he's going to have a better year next year. That's the way. I wanted to hold on to Prescott and Herbert. I do love what you said about buying Miles Sanders low. I've already been saying the same thing too. He produced pretty well the second half of last year, especially from a rushing perspective. They got to get him more involved in the passing game to really matter for fantasy. But he was getting a lot more of the workload and producing with it. And I don't think a lot of people even realize that. He had a couple 100-yard games towards the end of the season. So I love buying him, though. And Fields, I've loved for, since he came out. He was my 1B to Trevor Lawrence's 1A. Said I don't hate it, but I like I said, I like moving the quarterback. And what you said is true. We kind of went in opposite directions. I was trying to build up his starting lineup and I agree. It may not win, even adding a couple starters like that. But I guess it's our divergent philosophies: the win now in me, and then the productive struggle in you, to go get the quarterback and kind of not worry as much about this year. So, Andrew, any thoughts before getting into yours?
Sure. Yeah. So I think I would say that feels light for Dak for me. I feel like I could probably get a little bit more again. And I'm not saying I wouldn't take this trade as is, but I'm always trying to grab a little bit. Those little extra pieces really do add up. And especially this time of year, okay, you can walk away from a trade, right? There are definitely times where I've said, man, I'm glad I didn't make that trade, right? Where it's like, man, sometimes the best move is not making a move. So if you can get more, I always say, why not ask for more, right? Why make them happy and you feel like you're on the fence? Both, in my opinion, a trade should make both partners feel like a little bit uneasy. And so it's like, well, let me send it for a little bit much. That way they'll feel uneasy. I don't feel like I want to give this up. I do like the idea of getting a quarterback back for Dak, even though you've got a lot, because again, it's an ascending asset. Quarterbacks are going to be tough in this league because you've got them all. So it's like, you might as well, just keep gathering them and then adding Miles Sanders. And I'll use this to kind of segue into my own trade. I looked at this like you have to start 2 running backs in this league. It's a start 9, but you still have to start 2 running backs. And man, this roster does not have 2 starter running backs. Like, it just doesn't have it right now. So I completely agree with what Ryan said. I don't think you're 1 trade away. I think you are probably 5 to 6 good trades away from being a contender. And that's not saying being the best in the league, but just being in the, a serious position where you feel like you can win. So this is, again, Ryan, your trade's one of those I think you could make to continue being, building your roster, even though you're giving up a little value. I think you're building your roster out. Rocky, yours is kind of the opposite, where you're getting a pretty equal value, but you're, it's a 2 for 2. And just again, to use the DLF trade analyzer, because I was curious about
this. Just to defend my trade a minute.
Yeah, to defend your trade a little bit.
It's 2 bench guys for 2 starters.
True. Also,
in my opinion. You could argue Trey Lance will start over Dak come this season, but
Well, but I was going a different direction with the DLF trade analyzer. Yours is 694, and the Waddle and Mitchell side is 678. So you're losing a little bit, but it's not much. It's very close. But I think Ryan said it that I'm probably not that high on Mitchell, and I'm probably not that low on Moore. However, my trade used Rondale Moore, and mine was sending Baker and Moore for David Montgomery. But the logic, again, kind of what I just said, I don't mind losing a quarterback if you can get a solid starting running back out of this, because you need at least one. I would say the first trade I would make, even right now, is because of my hero running back strategy. Like we mentioned, we're all hitting the nails here. I would definitely trade for some sort of a running back that I feel at least is not going to decline too much. And I do think that offense is going up. I think Fields is a great target as well, because again, that offense is going up. I think Montgomery's got at least a couple years, and at least that way you have something on your roster. I think that increases a little bit of value in my mind on, again, DLF Trade Analyzer. That's 314 to 302, not counting a package adjustment, which I tend to remove on some of these because you're going to drop somebody anyway. It's like, well, I think you're going to consolidate that just right. You're going to get the right amount of value, but it helps in the two positions, your heaviest, receiver and quarterback, getting a running back. So that was kind of my thought. Again, I don't think I'm down on Rondale Moore, but I know a lot of people are down on Baker. And I would do that trade with, I think it was the team named Mila, M-I-L-A. And if I recall, I was just on this, but he didn't have the best quarterbacks. He does. He has Josh Allen. But then after that, it's Jacoby Brissett, Tua Tagovailoa, and that's it. Right. So like he could probably use a third, even if it's Baker, he could probably use a third quarterback there. His receivers are pretty good with Cooper Kupp, Amari Cooper, Chase Claypool. But again, adding a younger Rondale Moore is never a bad idea. The running backs this team has, he's got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Michael Carter. He's got some running backs he can give one up. So maybe you remove Rondale, you trade Baker for Carter or something like that, right? Same idea. I just feel like even now I would probably be targeting the running back position even in this time of year, if I can get him for the right price. And I just felt like that was a right price to me. Ryan, are you on the same page, or does mine suck too?
No, I like yours. I mean, it's tough to trade for Montgomery, but I mean, this guy's obviously a pretty solid dynasty manager, to turn this team into a playoff team, basically.
Yeah.
With these running backs. So, if you get one running back, even a guy like Montgomery, who's just, he's fine, right? If you get that guy as kind of your anchor, and then you continue to play the waiver wire game, if you can do that as well as you did this year, which, I mean, we've kind of put down this 20-man roster. But that's the positive side, right?
Yeah.
That you can find a running back every single week to plug and play, and not always going to be pretty, and it ends up with some of these guys in your lineup, but you can do it. So I like that one. I like getting value for Baker right now.
Well, and looking at it, the way Rocky said it, I guess, is you're trading what would be like your QB4, your QB5, and maybe like your wide receiver 5 for your running back 1. Right, like just looking at your own roster, that's a terrific trade starting lineup wise. And with these short rosters, I almost always try to consolidate because there's almost always somebody on the waivers I can pick up to fill that extra spot. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I don't mind picking up players and taking a flyer, especially if you've got terrible running backs. That dropping Benjamin seems like a great idea too. Like go pick up somebody else. Like let's see who we can get. But I don't know who all's out there. I'm not going to look. But that's my mentality.
I found another one. Bonus trade.
I love it.
What do you guys think of this? So this is the team Just Win Baby. He's got Mac Jones, just lost Ben, got Carson Wentz kind of in limbo. Who knows where he's going, if he's going anywhere, if he's going to start. That's and he also has Heineke. So those are his 4. Pretty weak, obviously.
And Jordan Love on Taxi, but again, same thing. Like just so many question marks there. Yep.
And he's got crazy running back depth chart: Chubb, Eckler, Aaron Jones, Kamara, Singletary, Penny. Baker Mayfield for Penny. What do you think?
It's not terrible. I don't know if I'd do that, but I don't hate it.
I don't know if I would do that either, honestly.
I know.
I don't know. That might not be enough. But maybe like maybe like a same kind of thing, like a Baker and a receiver for a Chubb. I don't mind that. You know what I mean? Like,
well,
I don't know if that gets you that was going to be my only issue with yours, Andrew. I liked yours. I just think people hate Baker so much. I'm not sure what happens there. I mean, not that people love Montgomery, so maybe it works.
That's why I targeted an RB2, right? I wasn't going for Dobbins or like Akers, like one of these names. Like Montgomery kind of went under the radar this year, but I feel like could be a good linchpin for your team. That's why I was like, but yeah, I like that logic, Ryan. That's not a bad trade. It's a risky move, but it's not a bad move.
If you're going to do Baker and receiver, you might be able to get. I wonder if maybe you could get Kamara, given some.
I was actually going to say the same. Like,
yeah.
I wonder if you could do like a Baker for Kamara. Like they both have question marks right now. We don't know if Kamara is playing. In all honesty, I love Kamara on productive struggle teams. I love taking on any risk I can because if he succeeds, you trade him for more than you paid for him. If he fails, your points go down. That's what you want anyway. Like either way, you win, right? So like Kamara to me is a terrific option if you're trying to be first or last. One of those two will happen with Kamara. Like you don't know which one yet, but he'll either be first or last.
And I'm not even that worried about the legal issue. I do have somewhere he's actually from a fantasy standpoint. Like even if he plays every game next year, who's his quarterback? Is Michael Thomas gone?
Exactly.
What does Sean Payton leaving mean? But I also think that Kamara could have a little more staying power than some of these guys because he hasn't taken quite the beating that some of them have because he's not running off tackle every play. He's getting a lot of passes, getting out of bounds sometimes. And
maybe you could get Aaron Jones too. That's another one of those like good running backs with question marks, right? A lot of people are down on Aaron Jones. People are saying they'll take Dylan for Jones straight up.
I do think for any of those, you probably have to do Baker plus, even though
I think it's
quarterback.
Too.
Yeah, sure.
But again, why not send the little one, right? Why not send Baker for Kamara and see what the guy says? You never know. Maybe he replies back with, "Yeah, do that in your second, and I'll do it." Psh, done. You know what I mean? Like that's easy. Like
before we finish up, since you threw that one out there, do you think Penny is viable next year?
Viable? Yeah. I mean, I think
he'll be the fan. You'll be able to start him some. Like he'll be at least a 1B that gets enough or a 1A somewhere. What do you think?
I don't know about that. I don't know if I'm ready to go that far. Just so much up in the air with him. Obviously, we don't. I mean, he's a free agent. We don't even know where he's going to play.
Right. Yeah.
And then, I mean, of course, with him, the injury history is always weighing pretty big. I would say if I have Penny on my roster, if he signs where it looks like he's going to be viable, I would trade him.
And I'm guessing even if it's like Seattle, I think that's still a good time to sell him because everybody, Chris Carson missed most of last year. I don't think anyone thinks Chris Carson's going to be great again this year. So Seattle could actually be one of the best places for his value, I think. So anyway, good trades all around. Bonus trade from Ryan. Hated my trade, but I'm good with it. So,
but I love you, Rocky.
I love you too, Ryan. And I'll be seeing you next week. But for this show, let's finish up here, Ryan. I mentioned at the beginning, we're gonna let you plug. Me and Andrew are gonna take a nap while you plug the 90 different things you do.
It's not that bad. I've consolidated actually.
Okay.
You can find all my written work at dynastyleaguefootball.com. Follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. I've got the DLF Dynasty podcast. You can also find it DLF or on podcast apps, and Locked On Dynasty podcast as well.
Yes.
I think that's it.
That wasn't bad.
No, that wasn't too bad. Yeah.
Better than Bogman last week.
Yeah. Listen to all of them.
Bogman's a busy man too. He had a lot of stuff he was doing. That was great to hear last week.
Okay, so we'll just finish up here. Just want to thank you again for coming on, Ryan. As for us, you can follow me on Twitter at DynastyFF Addict. Follow Andrew at Andrew Hall FF. Follow our third co-host, Scott Sidlow. We always blame the third co-host for everything, so I'm blaming Scott for my bad trade.
Perfect.
Follow Scott at Scott_Sidlow. And follow the DAP Network at DAP_Network. Dynasty Junkies at Dynasty Junkies. Please give a rating, subscribe, and review if you like what you've heard. Helps people find us. We always love to hear what you guys think of the pod. And also make sure you're subscribing and following the DAP Network. You can get access to this when it goes live. Same with Fantasy Timeline. Occasionally, Trade Addicts will go live as well. I think that's it. So, Andrew, take us out.
Yeah, again, Ryan, thanks so much for coming on. Good to finally pod with you. I know I've been listening to your voice for so many years. It's such a humbling experience to have you on the podcast. So really, really appreciate you having. And again, what an overachiever having 2 trades. Well done on that one. But yes, with all that, it was a great time tonight. Awesome job, everybody. Well done. Let's hopefully we had helped some of our junkies get a little bit worse at Dynasty. Who knows? But with that, Junkies out.